went pro in 2008, and then you started
Correct.
powerlifting a couple years later. Why did you end up switching?
Well, I found out really early on in my pro career about my limitations genetically.
Yeah,
Not having that really nice V taper. And it was a bit of a disappointment on my behalf.
sure.
When you go through the amateur ranks, and you have a gift of one of the big threes in bodybuilding, that being um conditioning. That was
Hmm.
kind of my gift. I wasn't, though it was hardly ever the biggest guy up there and was certainly never the most symmetrical, but I was always the most conditioned, the
Hmm.
most peeled, the most lean. And so with that one real big positive attribute, I could just show up to any show at any time and contend for the win as long as I was
Yeah.
in shape.
Were you naturally very lean? Was it easy for you to get that lean? Or?
Um, no, not. I wouldn't say naturally lean. I mean, I'm not. I'm definitely not as lean as Alberto, but I can sure get there. You
Mm.
know, and once I'm there, while symmetrically I may not look the best, it's just the folks called me skinless. When you see that skinless, look, your eyes just get big and you can't
Yeah.
help, but not recognize it. But then when you go through the amateur ranks and you go to the pros, when everybody's that peeled,
Yeah.
and everybody's got that conditioning, and plus on top of it, they've got the size and the symmetry. When you're a competitive person, you can't help but start to want to shy away from that.
Yeah.
And so then at that time, I had met Eric, and the very first time I had ever met Eric was at one of his powerlifting meets. And it was a fun environment, and it was something where I was like, I could actually kind of be in control of my placing and not just get up there shredded on the bodybuilding stage and hope for the best. You know what
Hmm.
I mean?
Yeah.
And so then after I saw that and met the guys, my wife was like, I think I want to do that. So I coached her to her first powerlifting competition in 2009. And then that kind of sparked a new interest in what would end up being kind of a new sport that I was going to compete in.
Awesome. Yeah, and I definitely relate there because I too, I had pretty good strength, like in college and everything, and then but size wise, I mean, I would say like my, 180 or my 190 didn't look as good as another person's 180 or 190, even at similar body fats. And, I have good genetics for sports, I have long limbs and everything. But that makes it harder in the bodybuilding sense to fill out. And so, me with 17-inch arms, let's say, it doesn't actually look that big, and so if I'm competing against a guy 6 inches shorter than me and, with great symmetry, it's going to be tough. And I think powerlifting, and something I was going to bring up is that I think powerlifting is a great route for people who maybe don't have the best genetics for bodybuilding because, you know, so much of, I mean, muscle hypertrophy is one aspect and it's so genetically determined. And of course, it's not just genetics, but there's a huge component there. Whereas strength, obviously, there's that genetic component to do with muscle mass, but there's also the neurological factors and technique. There's more you can work on. And so I think it gives people who are a little neurotic like us and like competitive, they can work on those little edges there and, to get a competitive advantage. And so I think it is a good route for people who maybe don't have the best genetics from a bodybuilding standpoint.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Because I mean, let's face it. If you're an athlete in any sport, you're going to have weight training as at least a component to make yourself a better athlete in that sport, right? Well, what if you don't have a sport? What if you don't have a sport? You just like weight training, and weight training is your sport, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's not a whole lot out there. You've got bodybuilding, you've got powerlifting, maybe weightlifting when you're talking about the Olympic lifts.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's kind of a natural, almost if weightlifting is your sport, it's kind of a natural, where do you do best?
Right.
Especially if you're a competitive guy like I am. There's these two sports where weightlifting is kind of my sport. I'm naturally going to go to the one, of others, I guess you might say. That now CrossFit's obviously very, very
Yeah.
popular as well, and that could be an avenue for a weightlifter where weightlifting is their sport. But yeah, it's kind of a nice, you have a choice now. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And it's not like you have to just keep hammering away at bodybuilding. And then, we're all faced with that temptation of taking that, we'll just call it a magic supplement, that is just going to make you huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That,
Yeah.
you can't deny that. That's something that is very tempting, I think, for
Sure.
anybody that is a weightlifter,
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, the unfortunate thing with powerlifting is it does seem to bang you up a lot more easily. And I think it was Eric Helms who said when you decide to do powerlifting, you're kind of deciding to just slowly, wear down your body, and you're just trying to prevent it from going too fast. And unfortunately, that does seem to be the case. I mean, there seems to be a lot more longevity in bodybuilding than powerlifting, and I love like the powerlifting aspect. I love getting stronger, but certainly, a day of heavy squats and heavy deadlifts compared to getting the same volume through, less taxing exercises, it seems to wear you down. So how long are you still competing in powerlifting? I don't know when your last meet was.
My last meet was just this last July.
Okay.
And I did pretty good. That was my full intention with that was not to focus on that meet, but more importantly to qualify for Raw Nationals,
Okay.
which is coming up next month. Now, unfortunately, I've been kind of fighting an injury that I think is related to my scoliosis, and that just kind of came to a head, and it kind of put a stop in my powerlifting training, I guess you might
Okay.
say, or at least getting ready for that particular powerlifting meet, the Raw Nationals. So yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful that I can get back to it. Right now, I'm kind of in a transitional phase, I guess you might say,
Okay.
where I'm still training very religiously. I'm still dabbling in the powerlifting lifts, but just not as intensely. And by intensity, I mean it's not as heavy loads like you were talking about. It's through
Sure.
lighter
Sure.
loads, other exercises, getting more volume in. So yeah, that's my hope is to get back there again, and I think I will get back there again. But you're right, it is a sport where, especially if you're not, I guess if you're not utilizing the current evidence that we have on staying healthy and getting
Yeah.
the most from your training and not breaking things like periodization, and things like frequent deloads and things like that. I think it's better. But I think that
Yeah.
you're right. I think it's definitely a sport where it's like, where are you going to last longer? You're going to last longer in football, or you're going to last longer in basketball. It's just the
Right.
nature of football. It's a much more physical sport.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of a similar analogy to bodybuilding and powerlifting.